So hello everybody and welcome to this project. In this project we're going to build a random meal generator. So for example, if you're just feeling hungry, you can just use our app. You can just click on the show a recipe button and you'll be shown a random recipe. There you go. I can't pronounce this. I think it's coq au vin. There's a French recipe. There you go. We have a category and also from which country, and we also have all the ingredients for this recipe. So olive oil, bacon, shallots, chicken legs, chicken thighs, and everything. Also we have all the images also, and of course, how can we forget this? We also have the instructions of this whole recipe. So it's a perfect recipe app and it's not too complicated. We're just going to use a Riverpod state management. So we already used the provider state manager and also set state, so it's time for some other state management. So we're going to use the Riverpod state management, and it's pretty easy. Riverpod is also kind of like a provider, you will see it. And I also have this functionality. I can just click on this YouTube button and I'll be shown a YouTube video, but I don't want to open it because it doesn't work on the emulator. As you saw, it just doesn't work on the emulator so well, but on a real device it will work perfectly. And if I just go back, I can also click on show recipe and I'll have another random recipe. See, it was a random recipe from the API. So let me just show you the API we're going to use. We're going to use the MealDB API. So it's a really perfect API. I really love this API. First of all, it's free for testing purposes. Of course, if you want to use this app in production mode, you have to pay to the API, but it's not so much. It's not too much, a pretty decent amount. And there you go. We have lots of API endpoints. Search meal by name, list all meals by first letter, list all mail categories. But the API, the main endpoint we're going to use, I think, yeah, there you go. Look up a single random meal. We're going to use this endpoint, and with this endpoint we're going to get the data from the API and show it on our app. So I'm really excited to build. Alright guys, so I have a new project named random meal generator, and let's get some packages before we move on. So let's go to pubspec.yaml and get 4 packages actually. So the first package is going to be the HTTP package for making HTTP requests to the API. Then we're going to use the Flutter Riverpod package for implementing a Riverpod state. Then I'm going to get the Google Fonts package for configuring my font so that I can just use any font I want. Then at last I have the URL launcher package for actually launching my URL into a YouTube app. For example, we could have a YouTube URL for a recipe, then we will launch it into our YouTube app. So that's it for the pubspec.yaml, and let's get to main.dart and do some cleanup. So I'm going to just clear out everything from here. I'm going to just close material app. And for the home, I'm going to give a home screen. Then I'm going to disable the debug banner. So I'm going to say debug show check mode banner is going to be false. So I'll create a separate folder named screens, and in that folder, I'm going to actually have a new file named homescreen.dart where I have my home screen widget. Then I'm going to import Flutter here, and I'm going to create a stateless widget because I won't have any, I won't use any set state because we're going to use a Riverpod state manager. I'm going to just create a stateless widget. I'm going to just name it home screen. And let's actually import this widget in main.dart. There you go, perfect. Let me just save everything, and we should have a black container because in the home screen we're returning a black container. There you go, I have a black container. Let's go to homescreen.dart and actually return a scaffold. And in the scaffold, so for the scaffold I'm going to give a body because the body, like the background image, is going to be a recipe image. So for the body, I'm going to use a container so that I can actually provide an image. The body container and decoration is going to be box decoration, and now I'm going to provide the image. So the image, I'm going to use a decoration image widget because we have to use it in box decoration. We can't use a normal image, but in the decoration image I can provide an image provider. So I'm going to use the asset image, and in the asset, so I have a folder named images, and I have this background.jpg file. Of course, I'll just provide this image if you want in the resources folder. You can just download it. And the asset image, I'm going to just say go to the images folder and yeah, just get the background.jpg file. Let me just save everything, but before that let's actually also call fit. So fit, it should actually fit for the whole screen, so I'm going to use the box fit.cover. Now when I save everything, I should have that recipe image for the background. There you go, perfect. So in the center of that image I'm gonna actually have a white container where I'll have a button. I'll just have like feeling hungry, then you can click on a button where we'll actually navigate to the recipe screen. So after this container, after this image itself, we're gonna provide a child for this container. So the child for this container is gonna be a column. But before that, let's actually also provide a container for the whole column. So it should also be in the center of the whole image, right? So I'm gonna say child center, and child of this is going to be a container, so a white container. And we can actually provide in height. Let's actually do responsive. So height of the whole container is going to be media query dot of context dot size dot height into 0.45. So just take 45% of the whole height. And let's actually also provide a padding for this container. So padding edge insets dot symmetric, and from the horizontal I'm going to just provide 30 pixels. Okay, perfect. Let's actually also provide a color for this container. So decoration, I'm going to say box decoration, and in the box decoration I'm going to say color is colors dot white. But let's actually also provide an opacity, because I don't want the actual white color, I also want a light white color. So I'm going to just use it with opacity. I'll just say 0.0 or 0.85 should actually be good. Let's actually save everything, and in the center of the whole image I should actually have a white container. There you go, perfect. But the problem is it's kind of like the width is actually, it shouldn't take the whole width, right? Let's actually provide a child for it, then let's see what happens. So after this box decoration, I'm going to say child of this is going to be a column. Let's save everything. Okay, there you go. And again there's a problem, because we didn't provide any widgets for the column, right? That's why it's again too small. So I'll say child column, and the children of the column, first of all, is going to be a text widget. So text, and let's actually just say feeling hungry. Let's also provide a style. So I'm going to again create a new file named utils.dart, not in the screens folder, actually in the lib folder, utils.dart. And there I'm going to of course just create a function named text style. So text style, so it's going to return text style. I'm going to just call this function also text style. It takes in a double font size, and as optional parameters it's going to take a color and a font weight, and I'm going to return Google Fonts. So I'm going to just say return Google Fonts dot Montserrat for providing the size, color, and the font weight, because I just like this Montserrat font. Of course you can just use any font you want. So font size, I'm going to just pass in the size parameter, and for the color also the color, and for the font weight let's also pass this FW parameter. Okay, now I can use this function. I can just call this wherever I want. So in the home screen for the text feeling hungry, after this I'm going to say style is going to be text style. Let's actually also import this, and let's provide a size. So size, I'm going to just say 30 pixels, and the color is colors.black, and the font weight, let's provide a bold, let's provide boldness. So font weight to W700. Let's save everything. And for the column, so in the container itself I should have a text feeling hungry, but let me just save everything so that it also saves the utils.dart file. There you go, feeling hungry, perfect, with the Montserrat font. Okay, and after this text widget I'm going to say sized box. So I want to have some spacing between that text widget and the button. So sized box, height 25 pixels. Now I'm going to use a text button. So text button, this is just like a normal button, and on press will do nothing, but the child of this is going to be a text which says show a recipe. Let's provide a style for the text widget. So style is going to be text style function. It takes in 22 pixels as the font size, and the color is going to be color.black, and the font weight, let me just say font weight.w800, or let's actually say w600 because I don't want it that dark. Let me just align everything perfectly. And for the text button, let's also provide the background color, so I can just use the style property here. So style, I'm going to say text button dot style from, and I can say background color is colors dot deep orange, but deep orange accent, so kind of like a light deep orange. Now when I save everything, I should have a button named show a recipe. There you go, perfect. And that's actually good. It looks good, but don't you think it's a bit dark? And also I want some padding around the whole containers, children's, right? So here for the column, I can just say main axis alignment is going to be in the center. So I want everything in the center. So main axis alignment dot center, and there you go, feeling hungry, show a recipe, and everything is in the center. Yeah, so we're actually good. We're actually done with the home screen. It was pretty easy. You just had the background image, then a small container with the feeling hungry text, and then a show recipe button. Now in the next section, we'll actually just build out the UI of the recipe screen before we get the data from the API. So let's create a new screen named recipe screen. So here in the screens folder, I'm going to create a new file named recipe screen dot, and here I'm going to import Flutter material.dart, and I'm going to create a stateless widget because of course I won't use any set state. And for the class name, I'm going to just say recipe screen, where I'll actually have my whole recipe. So I can just navigate to this recipe screen. In the home screen.dart, whenever I click on this button, I want to navigate to the recipe screen. So what I can say is I can just say navigator dot push, and I have to provide the context and the root. So the root is actually material page root. And for the builder, I have to provide the context, and I'm going to return the screen. So the screen name is going to be recipe screen. Now when I save everything, when I click on this button, I should actually be navigated to the recipe screen with a black container. There you go, I have a black container because here we're returning a container. Let's actually return a scaffold, because I want to have a white background for the whole screen. And now for the scaffold, let's provide a body. So body is going to be a single child scroll view because my whole screen is actually scrollable. The child of a single child scroll view is going to be a column because I have multiple widgets beneath each other. So I'm going to say child column. And the children of this, so the children of this, actually we have two children, right? So the first child is going to be the background image, and the second child is actually the whole information. So children, I'm going to say container, and I'm going to provide the width. So width is going to be media query.off context. So take the whole width. Actually you can just take the whole width. And for the height, so height, I'm going to say take the whole height and actually do it dynamically. So take the whole height and divide it by, or actually multiply it by 0.45, so that it takes only 45% of the whole height. And now what is the child of this? So I don't want any child, I just want to provide an image, so I can use a decoration. So box decoration, and the image is going to be from the network. So network image, let's actually provide a URL for the network image. So I'll just search for an image in the internet, and I'm going to just copy out the URL. So I'll just for now get the pasta image, and in the images I'll just search for a random image. So I'm going to just take this image. I want the URL of the whole image. Okay, there you go, this is the whole URL for this. And yeah, this is actually the whole URL, and I'm going to just paste it over here for the URL. Let's also say fit, so it should actually fit, and we have an error. So image, network image. So okay, I forgot it, actually I have to wrap it in decoration image, right? So decoration image, and then I can use the image property, because for the box decoration, I have to actually use a decoration image for providing an image, and then fit. Oh, wait a minute. I just align everything so that I won't get confused, because when I don't align it, actually it's pretty much confusing. So fit box fit dot cover, just cover out the whole screen. Like, it should actually take the available height and width which I provided here, and when I actually save everything, I should have my pasta image. There you go, perfect. So I have my pasta image, and now here I'm gonna have the title of the whole recipe, the instructions, the ingredients, the category, the area, and also the YouTube URL button. So after this container, I'm gonna create a new container, and here what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna provide a width. So width, just take the whole width, right? So I won't provide any height because I don't have any specific height. It just depends on the whole instructions, text, widget, and so on. So I won't specify any height. And the child of this is going to be a column, because I'll have multiple children beneath each other. So child, column, and children. First of all, I'm going to provide the meal name. So here what I can do is I can say text, and let's say pasta, and let's provide a style. So style is text style widget, a text style function, and let's provide a font size. The font size is going to be 35 pixels, and the color is going to be color.black, and the font weight, I'm going to just use a bold font weight W700. Let's actually align everything, and after the text widget, I'm going to have a sized box because I want some spacing between this text widget and the other buttons. So here I'm going to set sized box, height just 2 pixels. And now what I'm going to have is I'm going to have actually 3 elements in a row because I want them actually next to each other. So I'm going to use a row, and the children's are, first of all, I'll have 2 chips for the area and for the category. So I can use a chip widget because I want to have those rectangular border radius containers, so I can just use a chip for it. And the label is going to be in the center. So in the center, I'm going to have a text widget which actually says the category, and the category for pasta, for now I'm just hard coding everything, but later on we'll get from the API. For now I'll just say, I don't know, maybe for lunch is maybe the category is just lunch. I'll just leave it for now like this. And let's actually provide styling. So style for this is going to be a text style function, 18 pixels, and the color is going to be colors.black, and the font weight, let's actually say font weight at W600. And I'll just wrap this whole center widget into a container because I want to have some specific height for the chip, and I'm going to use that 25 pixels for the height. Let's also provide a background color. So background color for this chip is colors.yellow accent, so light yellow. And now when I say everything, I should have a chip named lunch, and I also have my pasta title, of course. And the problem is, like, they're not aligned perfectly, right? I want them to be aligned at the left side. So I can go to the column and say cross-axis alignment is cross-axis alignment.start. Everything should be aligned at the start, and when I say everything, I should have my pasta and lunch. There you go, perfect. Let's also provide a padding because I don't want them to be exactly at the left side. I want to have some padding, so I'm going to just wrap this whole column into a padding, and edge is at all 15 pixels. There you go, pasta and then lunch. And after that, I'm going to have another chip. I'm going to just change the background colors to deep orange accent, and instead of saying lunch, now I'm going to provide the area, so it's Italian. I just say Italy, and let me just say everything. There you go, Italy. And let's also provide a sized box, so I want to have some spacing between these chips, so I can say size box, and the width is actually 10 pixels of width between those 2 chips. There you go, lunch in Italy. And now at the right side, I want to have a button for the YouTube section, right? when I click on that button, I want to have the YouTube video for this specific recipe. So for that, what I can do is I can actually again create a text button. So I'm going to say text button on pressed. For now, do nothing. Later on, we'll implement what should happen when you press on the button, and the child of this is going to be a text widget which actually says YouTube. Let's provide a style. So style is going to be text style, and the size, let's actually think. So we want it pretty much small because I won't have a big button, so I just want a small button. So I'll say 18 pixels, and the color is going to be colors.white because it's actually perfect. It actually fits perfectly for the red YouTube button. And the font weight, I can just say font weight to W700. Let me just align everything. And now I'm going to provide the background color. So background color, I can say text is text button.style from. Text button.style from, and let's provide a background color. So background color is colors.red accent, a light red color. And let's also provide a border. So I'm going to say shape is going to be rounded rectangle border, and here I can provide the border radius. So border radius is going to be border radius of circular. So border radius is going to be border radius of circular, 5 pixels. Let me actually save everything and see the whole UI. There you go, YouTube button. But again, the problem is I don't want it to be that big, so I'm going to just wrap this text button into a container and provide a width, maybe 115 of width, and height 35. I don't think it won't make any difference. It just becomes a bit smaller. There you go, perfect. And the problem is, again, I just want it to be at the right side, right? So what I can do is, first of all, I can go to the row and say main axis alignment. So I want to have some space. I want to have space between those widgets. But now the problem is the Italy chip also goes to the right side. I don't want it, and I can actually solve this problem pretty easily. I just have to wrap these chips into separate rows. So I'm going to wrap it row. I'm going to take this chip and put that into that row here. Let's save everything, and we should have lunch Italy, and there you go. Because now these both chips are in a separate row, and I'm going to just provide a space between this row and the YouTube button. Okay. So we have the information, we have the title, we have the area, we have the category, and also the YouTube button. So let's provide a spacing between these chips and the ingredients widget. So after this whole row, I'm going to use the size box widget so that I can give some spacing. So size box of height 15 pixels maybe. And now I'm going to have a single child scroll view. But before that, let's actually just say what I'm actually showing. So I'm going to have a text which actually says ingredients. And the style of this is going to be a text style function. I'm going to call my text style function, and I'm going to have 25 pixels of size, and the color is going to be colors.black, and the font weight is going to be font weight W600. Let's actually save everything, and we should have a text which actually says ingredients. There you go, perfect. Now after the text ingredients, I'm going to have a single child scroll view. So I'm going to have a scrollable widget in the horizontal side, and I can actually scroll through the whole ingredients. But before that, let's actually provide again a size box of spacing. So height 10 pixels. And now I can use a single child scroll view widget. So single child scroll view. And the scroll direction is going to be in the horizontal side. So I can say axis.horizontal. And a child of this is going to be a row because I'll have multiple widgets next to each other. So the children are going to be the ingredients. Let's actually build out the ingredient widget. So here I'm going to have a column because first of all, at the top side, I'll have the ingredient image. After that, I'll have the ingredient name, and then after that, I'll have the measure of the ingredient. So for example, 2 teaspoons or so on. The child is going to be a column. And so for the row itself, I'm going to provide multiple children's, right? Later on I'll do it dynamically in a for loop, but for now I'll just provide one ingredient widget. It's going to be a column and a children of this column, because I'll have children's beneath each other. So children, first of all, I'm going to have an image widget, so image, and I'm going to actually get it from the network, so I can say network image, and the URL, let's actually search for any ingredient in the internet. For now, let's actually just say butter. Maybe let's get an image. Let's actually just take this one. Okay, perfect. Let's actually just take this image and provide a URL here for the network image, and let's actually also provide a width and height for the image widget. So for the image width, I'm going to just say 100 pixels, and for the height also it should just take 100 pixels, and it should actually fit into that image widget. So fit box fit cover, because I provided width and height of 100. Let me actually save everything, and I should have an ingredient image. There you go, butter. Perfect. And I think I didn't provide any sized box. Oh, I provided that. Okay, it's actually okay. Maybe let's say 15 pixels. Okay, perfect. Okay, now after the butter image, I'm gonna have the ingredient name. So what's the name of this ingredient? So I have a size box of height 10 pixels. Let's actually put a comma here, and now I have a text widget again. So text, the ingredient name is for now just butter, but later we'll get from the API. So the style of this is gonna be a text style function. I'm gonna again call it text style function, and 20 pixels of font size, a black color, and font weight to W700 as boldness. And after this one, I'm gonna again say size box, because now I'll have the measurements. Size box, height 7 pixels maybe, and now we'll have again a text widget. So I can just copy this, paste it over here, and instead of saying butter, let's actually say 1 slice maybe. Yeah, for the measurement, how much butter we need. And text style, let's actually make it a bit smaller. So I'll just say 18 pixels of font size, or 16 pixels should actually be good. And the color is going to be gray color, so we can actually differentiate between the ingredient and the measure. Let's actually save everything, and we should have a butter and also a slice. Okay, the problem is I didn't provide those widgets in the column itself. I just forgot it. It should actually be in the column here, right? Let's save now. There you go, butter and 1 slice. And after this, we'll have multiple children, but I won't implement it now because I don't want to write each and every widget 10 times or something like that. Later on, I will have a for loop which actually iterates through the ingredients and builds out the widgets. So after this ingredients widget, let's actually also provide quickly the instructions widget. So after the single chat scroll view, I'm going to have a sized box of height. So the height is going to be 10 pixels, and let's actually just copy something from here. I can just copy this, paste it over here. Instead of saying ingredients, I'm going to just say instructions. Here we're going to provide the instructions. I'm going to just copy this text widget, paste it over here, and for now let's actually say deep fry, because I don't want to write the instructions here. We of course get it from the API. I'm just doing the UI before we actually implement the backend. And yeah, styling, let's say 18 pixels should be good, because the instructions are actually pretty much really big. That's why, yeah, 18 pixels should be good. And font weight, let's say W400, and the font weight W600. Okay, this is good. Let's save everything, and we should have instructions also after the ingredients widget here. There you go, instructions, deep fry. So we'll actually finish with the UI, and let's actually get the data from the API and actually provide it to our UI. So the API we're going to use is actually called MealDB.com. It's a free API, and I just love this API because you don't need any API key or something like that when you're actually developing this app. But if you want to actually publish this app to a Play Store, you have to sign up for a Patreon, and I think you have to pay $2 a month or something like that. I don't know. So for just educational purposes, or if you're just developing for something, you can just use a test API key, and test API key is 1. And here we can actually see all the API endpoints. So we're going to use the random meal endpoint. Where is it? There you go. Look up a single random meal. Let me just copy this URL, paste it here, and we should have all our data. There you go. It just generated the random meal URL. Let's create a model in our app and also a repository. So as we did it for the newsreader app, we'll have 3 layers. We'll have a providers layer, we'll have a repository layer, and we'll also have a models layer. First of all, let's build out the model. In the lib folder, I'm going to create a new folder named models. I'm going to create a new file named mealmodel.dart. And in mealmodel.dart, let's create a new class named mealmodel. I'm gonna say final string. Let me just close this explorer so that you can actually see everything. So final string ID, I'll have a string ID, I'll have a name for the meal, I'll have a category for the meal, I'll also have an area for this meal. So final string area, and final string instructions, and we're gonna also have a final string image, so recipe image. Then I'm gonna also have a YouTube URL, so final string YouTube URL, and then at last final list of ingredients. Let's actually initialize everything. So meal model is this.id, this.name, this.category, this.area, this.instructions, this.image, this.youtube URL, and at last this.ingredients. Okay, perfect. Let's create a new function named from JSON, which actually parses the JSON data we get. So meal model dot from JSON, it takes in as a parameter map string dynamic JSON. So map string dynamic JSON. Now what I can do here, I can just say, so the ID is equal to go to the JSON, whichever JSON we get, and let's actually go to the API and see what our ID name is. So here we have a meals key, then in the meals key we have a list, and in that list we have, for example, the ID meal as a key. So what I can do is I get the JSON, then I go to the meals key, and in the meals key we actually have a list, right? So I'm going to go to the first index for this list because there is only one item in that list. So I'm going to go to the first index, and then in that index I'm going to go to the string, I think it was string ID, I'm not sure. Yeah, oh, it was ID meal. Okay, ID meal, and we're going to do the same thing with the others also. So the name is JSON meals, go to the first index, and the name for this one, so the key name for this one is, let's actually check it out. Yeah, it was string meal. Okay, string meal. Let me just copy some values, and because it actually pretty much easy, then I can just change every value. So name is equal to JSON meal string meal. Then I also have the category, right? So category is JSON meals first index, and it was string category. I already saw it in the API JSON data. And the area, this is also string area, and instructions, string instructions, and image, I'm not sure what the image variable is. Let's actually check it out. So image is equal to, where is it? So we have string tags, we have string YouTube, there you go, string meal thumb. So For meal thumbnail, they just said string meal thumb. And we also have the YouTube URL. So YouTube URL is, I don't know, they called it string YouTube. And then at last we have the ingredients, right? This is a bit tricky because as you can see in the data, we actually have to parse something. So the problem is they have like the ingredients not in a list, but they have it like key value pairs. So they have string ingredient 1, string ingredient 2, ingredient 3, ingredient 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It goes on till 20 because some values can also be null. So in our API data, we actually also have to clear something if it is actually null, because it can go till 20. We just have to check if it's null or not, then we'll add it to our list. It's actually also same technique for the measures also. They have string measure 1, measure 2. Let me just actually zoom it. So yeah, I hope you can see it now better. So string measure 4, string measure 3, string measure 7, string measure 8, and so on. So I'm going to create a new class named ingredient, so I can just add it to my ingredients list. So ingredient, it takes in a final string, so the name of the ingredient, and it's going to also take a final string measure of the ingredient. And let's actually just initialize those values because they're final. So this dot name and this dot measure. And here in the ingredients, for ingredients is equal to, I'm going to generate a list. So to generate a list in Dart, we can actually use the list dot generate, and the length is 20 because we have 20 items, and the index, I'm going to here get the index. And now what I can do is I can say ingredient. So this list of generate is going to run 20 times and it's going to provide us with the index. So ingredient, and I can say name, go to JSON, go to meals, but now it's going to be tricky. So name is JSON meals, go to the first index and string YouTube, but instead of saying string YouTube, let's say string ingredient 5. But again, instead of 5, here we're getting the index, right? So let's actually provide the index. So string ingredient, then I'm going to do string interpolation because I have a variable in a string, and what I can do is I can just say index. The problem is this index actually starts from 0 because here it actually starts from string ingredient 1. It doesn't have string ingredient 0. Then we'll have like a JSON error, JSON parse error, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just add +1 to the index every time I loop through this list.generate. So index +1, because at the first iteration it's going to provide us with the index, and the first index is going to be 0. Then I'm going to just add one value, so it's going to be 1 automatically. So now it kind of starts from 1. So I just solved it like this. It's a pretty nice fix, and for the measure it's pretty much a simple technique. JSON meals first index, and instead of saying string ingredient, go to string measure. Instead of saying 8, we'll just pass in the index +1. So this is how we actually create a list in Dart, which is called list.generate, and here we're returning the ingredient item. So it's going to add 20 ingredient items to this ingredients list, and in our UI we're going to actually filter out the list if it has any null values or empty string values. This is it for the meal model. Now we're going to actually create a repository layer where we'll actually get the data from the API. So let's actually now create a repository layer. I'm going to create a new folder in the lib folder, name repository, and I'm going to create a new file named meal repository. .dart, and here I'm going to create a new class named meal repository. So meal repository, and here I'm going to provide the URL. So first of all, let's actually also call a function, right? So we kind of need a function, and in the function we're going to return a future meal model. So future, this type of the function which we're going to return is meal model, future meal model, and a function name I can just say get meal. And this is going to be an async function because of course it could take some time to get the data from the API, right? let's get the URL. So the URL is pretty much just this URL here. I'm gonna create a string URL, and let's actually also make a URI of it, because to make a GET request we actually have to provide a URI. So URI is URI.parse, and the URI is actually just this URL. We're gonna parse the URL into a URI. Let's actually make a request to the data. We have to make a GET request because we're gonna get the data. Let's import the HTTP package. Here import HTTP the dot as HTTP, and here after this URI I'm going to say response is equal to be await. So we're going to await it because it could take some time to get the data, right? So await HTTP dot get, and I can just pass in the URI. So after making the GET request, let's actually also parse the whole JSON into a meal model. So of course I'm expecting a return of meal model here, so I'm going to return a meal model dot from JSON, because I'm going to now parse the JSON. So now we have to provide the JSON for the from JSON function. So I have to actually just decode the response here. I can just say JSON decode, and I can just pass in the response.body to parse the whole JSON to actually convert the response.body to JSON. And this from JSON function is going to just take the JSON and it's going to just parse the whole JSON. So taking this meal repository, I'm going to create a new layer named providers, where we'll actually have our providers. I can take the provider and actually provide the data to my UI. So let's create a new folder named providers where we'll have all our providers. So new folder providers. I'm gonna just have one provider, meal provider dot, and here I can just say final meal provider is equal to, now I can use the Riverpod package. So I'm gonna have a future provider because it could take some time to get the data, and we're gonna have a future meal model. That's why I'm gonna use the future provider, but there are of course like also normal providers, but for now I'm gonna use the future provider. The future provider, and this future provider of course comes from this Flutter Riverpod package, and it actually takes in a ref, and here we can return something. Let's actually also say which type of future provider. So type of future provider is a meal model, and in the ref we can actually just return something, as I said, right? So we have to return something, and I'm going to just call my repository. So here I can just say meal repository dot get meal function, and also let's actually say print calling provider, so that I know when I'm calling the provider. And this way I created a provider. So now I'm going to create a consumer which actually consumes the whole data and parses into our UI. So let's go to recipe screen here. So let's convert the recipe screen from a stateless widget into consumer widget, because here I'm going to consume the whole data which I'm going to get from the provider consumer widget, and I'm going to have a warning because the build method also takes in something else than a context. If you go here, it also actually accepts something called a watch, because now we can actually watch the whole stream, or we're going to actually watch the whole future. So after context I can just say watch, and this is a type of T function provider based object code. This is a really big name. I can just paste it over here to actually specify the type. So the type is actually, I think it's provider based and so on. But what this watch actually does is it actually just watches the whole provider throughout the whole app, and if we have any changes, it is gonna just trigger out the whole consumer widget, and now then we can actually update our whole UI. So we actually have to watch the provider, right? So I'm gonna create a new variable named async value, because this is a type of an async value, as it could take some time to get the data. That's why it's asynchronous. It's a type of meal model. This is how you do it in a Riverpod. So Riverpod is pretty much just a simple provider. you can also call a better provider. So async value meal model meal is equal to watch. So now I'm going to watch the whole provider throughout the whole app, and I can just pass in the provider variable here, and I'm going to just import the provider. Okay, perfect. Now after watching this, we of course have to do something with the provider, right? So here we get the data from the provider. Here we call the repository, then we are going to return the meal repository.get meal. So we're going to return a meal model, and here for the meal we're going to get the meal model. But again, there's a problem because we have to also check for loading and errors, right? So Riverpod actually just provides us with that. We can just use this meal variable, and instead of returning a scaffold, so I can return a scaffold, but for the body I can say meal.when. So this when function is really good because this when function, we can just pass in the data, we can pass in loading and error, so we can do something when it's loading. So when it's loading the whole provider, we can do something. So of course when it's loading, I want to actually call the circular progress indicator in the center, right? So I can just say loading, I'm going to return a center, and a child of the center is going to be circular progress indicator. And I have to actually just say center. So I'm going to do this when I'm loading something, and now when I get the data, I can call a single child scroll view. But if I have any error, so if I have an error, it's going to give us the error and also the stack. I can just say in the center, I'm going to just get the whole error. So in the center, I'm going to say child of the center is going to be a text widget. Then I'll show the whole error. That's why I love Riverpod. It's pretty much simple to get the, I don't have to specifically check if it's loading or not. This .when function actually does that for me. And here, so text is, I'm going to take the error.toString. So let me just copy the whole single child scroll view because I have to actually paste this for the data. I'm going to just copy this and just cut this because I want to align everything perfectly. There you go. Now it's going to trigger us a warning because the parameter data is missing. So we have a loading. So we're doing something when the provider is loading. So when we're getting the data, we're doing something. If we have an error, we're showing a text widget in the center with the error. And now when we have the data, we can use the data parameter, and I can just say data is whichever data we get, right? So this is going to provide us with the meal, and I'm going to just return the single child scroll view. Or instead of saying meal, because it actually just confuses between this meal and this meal, so I'm going to just say recipe. Automatically this is going to give us a recipe, which is a type of meal model. Now to actually also use the providers, we have to wrap the whole my app into a provider scope so that I can actually use provider. So let's go to main.dart and wrap this my app into a provider scope. Provider scope. Child of this is going to be a my app. And now when I actually just restart everything, you will see it. So when I go to recipe screen, I have a circular progress indicator in the center, and after a while everything will be normal, and I'm going to get the data. So I just did a full restart. Now when I click on show recipe, as you will see, we're going to have a circular progress indicator, and there you go. That means we got the data, so we didn't have any error or something like that. So now we got the data. Let's go to recipe screen, and this recipe variable is going to actually give us the whole data. Now I can just use this recipe variable and actually just parse the whole data into my UI. I'm going to take this recipe and I'm going to just wrap this whole thing into a return statement because I want to do something before actually parsing it to my UI. So I'm going to just close it also here. I want to have this kind of return statement. I'm going to just return a single child scroll view. So what I'm going to do is I want to actually parse the whole recipe ingredients list, right? So as I said, recipe dot ingredients list, and this ingredients list can also have some null values or empty string values. I just don't want those values. So I can say meal recipe.ingredients.remove where, so remove everything where the element, so with the element dot name. So this element is actually pretty much just the ingredient class there. So I can just say there, where, let me just show you. So meal model, we have this ingredients class, right? So this element is pretty much just the ingredients class. So what I can say is remove everything in the recipe.ingredients list if the element dot name is equal to null, or if the element dot name is equal to an empty string. So if there is equal to an empty string or a null value, then just remove those values. Then I'll have a filtered out list. Now what I can do is I want to just provide the image for the whole image widget, right? So I can just say recipe dot image. Perfect. Oh, let me just close this the parenthesis. So recipe dot image, and instead of saying pasta here, I can say recipe dot name, and instead of saying lunch here, I can say recipe dot category. Instead of saying Italy here, I can say recipe dot area, and instead of saying YouTube here, I have to say YouTube, but we'll later on implement the YouTube URL launch. So here ingredients, so instead of actually providing the whole children's here, I don't want to write column 20 times or something like that. So I'm going to just use the dot map, which is going to iterate through the ingredients list and just render out the widgets dynamically. So children is not a list, it's gonna actually be a map. So children is recipe dot ingredients dot map, and this is gonna actually provide us with the ingredient. So I'm gonna go to this one, and here I'm gonna just specify the type. So type of this list is going to be ingredient, and what I can do is recipe.ingredients.map ingredients, and I have to call dot to list, right? So whenever I call dot map, I have to call dot to list. I can take this column and paste it over here. So here in the dot map function, I'm going to return the whole column. Now to get the image of the ingredient, we can go to the API. There is another endpoint. Oh wait a minute, we have error here. Okay, we didn't close it here, we had a slight warning. So for providing the ingredients image, there is an endpoint. Let's go to the API again. So let's go to MealDB, and there you go. They also have an endpoint for the ingredient images. So I can just take this endpoint. So mealdb.com/images/ingredients, and then we have to just pass in the ingredient name. So I can just take this whole API endpoint, I can paste it over here and do a string interpolation here. So string interpolation, a dollar symbol, ingredient dot name. Here I'm going to just pass the ingredient dot name dot png. So I'm doing dynamically. Instead of saying butter, I can just say ingredient dot name, because this is going to give me the ingredient dot name, and here I can say ingredient dot measure, and for the instructions I can say recipe dot instructions. So let's actually reset everything and see if we have the whole data into our UI. Okay, let me just click on show a recipe, and there you go. This is the ingredient name. Then we also have the category, we also have the area, and we have all the ingredients in a dynamic way. We didn't call each widget 20 times or 20 times or 10 times. We just use a dot map to actually dynamically map everything. It also provides some spacing between those widgets, right? So I can just wrap this whole column into a padding, and I can just say padding is edge insist dot only from the right side 10 pixels. So I just want to have some slight spacing between those ingredients. I think it didn't have any difference. Okay, it's okay. Let's see the instructions. Okay, there you go. We also have the whole instruction. And now the problem is, so when I go back, when I click on show recipe again, I have the same recipe, right? I actually want to have a new recipe. So let's also implement something called .refresh in Riverpod. So to refresh the whole provider, we have to actually just pretty much call a small function, and then we can easily refresh the whole provider. So let's go to the home screen so that we can actually refresh the whole provider. So let's actually also extend from the consumer widget so that I can actually use the provider. So consumer widget, which automatically takes in a watch. And then here, instead of navigating, before that I want to actually refresh the whole provider. So before navigating to the screen, just refresh the provider. To refresh the provider, we can say context. So the current context actually has the provider because I extended it from the consumer widget, right? So context.refresh, not .read, .refresh. And we have to pass in the provider. So the provider name is just meal provider. I can just pass in here, oh no, meal provider. Let's close this and let's actually save everything. And now when I come back to the screen, as you'll see, let's actually also just restart everything so that we have some, so because we do lots of code, and we can start from the beginning. Okay, let's click on show recipe. It's going to show a circular proxy indicator. There you go, we have a random recipe. Now let's go back and click on show recipe again, where we should have another random recipe because it called .refresh, and there you go, we have a new random meal. That means our .refresh works perfectly. And the last thing we have to implement is only the YouTube button, right? Whenever the user clicks on a YouTube button, I actually want to get a YouTube video in a YouTube app. So to actually get the YouTube video, it's also pretty much easy. Let's go to the YouTube button here. In the recipe screen, let's go to YouTube button and on press. So we actually have to check first of all if the YouTube URL is null or not. So I'm going to say if recipe.youtube URL is not equal to null, and recipe.youtube URL is not equal to an empty string. So if it's not equal to that, then I'm going to actually launch the YouTube URL link. And if it doesn't succeed, then I'm going to have another if statement. So first of all, this is going to be async because it could take some time to launch the whole video, right? So if await can launch, so this can launch comes from the URL launcher package. So if it can launch with the recipe.youtube URL, wait a minute. So if this can actually launch, then that means we can pretty much launch with the YouTube URL. So we can actually pretty much launch the YouTube URL. So what I can do is I have to actually check if the native app launch succeeded or not. So final bool native app succeeded. So it's just checking for iOS and Android. For iOS, there is some problem with Safari and so on. So we have to actually say await launch. So actually this launch comes with the URL launcher package. So this can launch actually checks whether the specified URL can be handled by some app installed on a device. It actually just checks for it. So if this checks and if it can actually launch, then I'm going to actually launch the whole YouTube URL. This can launch only checks if it can launch or not. Okay. And this launch function is actually going to launch the whole YouTube URL. And here I can pass in the YouTube URL. So I can just say recipe.youtube URL and here I also have to pass more parameters. So first of all, I have to also say force Safari VC is false, so don't force it to take Safari. And also say universal links only is also true. So if it can't launch, there is some problem with the device or something like that, so then we actually have to force Safari. So here what I'm going to do here is in the if statement itself, so if native app succeeded, if it's not equals to true, then I can say await. I can just copy this and paste it over here. Await launch recipe.youtube URL and force Safari VC is actually true. So let me just wrap it up for you. So first of all, we're checking if the YouTube URL is null or not. If it's not null, then we're checking if it can launch the YouTube URL. If it can launch, then we're checking if it can launch for the native app. So for example, this is I think for Android. So because in Android we don't have Safari or something like that, right? And then if it has any problems with iOS, then we're going to use this await launch with the Safari. Let's actually save everything and click on the YouTube button, and we should be navigated to the YouTube app with the desired video. Let's click on YouTube. Let me also open up the console here. Click on YouTube, and there you go. My YouTube app is opened up, and I should have my video. There you go, I have my video, Polish chicken, something like that. Okay, perfect. Let's go back. Let's go to our app again, and that means also our YouTube button is working perfectly. So I think yes, we're actually pretty much finished with our app. Let's have a quick review what we did. So first of all, we created a home screen with the small UI with the background color for the whole scaffold. Then in the center we had a container which actually just navigates us to the recipe screen. In the recipe screen, we actually have the recipe image. We actually have the recipe image. We have the name. We have the category, the area, and the ingredients and the instructions UI. Then we implemented Riverpod. Before that, we actually got the data from the API. And the API used was MealDB.com. We created models and repositories, and we parsed the whole JSON data. Then we created a provider which actually provides the whole data. And with the provider, we had a future provider because it could take some time to actually get the data, right? Then we had a consumer widget which consumes the whole data, and we pretty much just watched the whole data. So we watched for any changes or something like that. And then we had this meal.when. So this when actually just gives us 3 parameters: loading, error, and data. You can do something depending on the app state. If it's loading, we showed a circular progress indicator. If we have an error, we're going to show in the center the error. And if we have the whole data, then I have the whole recipe. I'm clearing out some null values. Then I'm going to just parse the whole variables into my UI. And at last, we just launched the YouTube URL with the URL launcher package. And yeah, that's it for this whole section. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some Riverpod. It's actually pretty much easy. It's just a better provider in my opinion. Just experiment with this package with your own apps and you will just get comfortable.